71.12%.
British people have spoken, and the answer is we're out.
They were seismic votes which are changing the intertwined history of these islands. And the legacy of those referendums, nearly 2 decades apart, are haunting the politics of today. Remain supporters dream of keeping the UK in the EU. And now some Unionist supporters believe the time has come to revisit the Good Friday Agreement after last week's failure to restore power sharing.
I think the word refresh of the Good Friday Agreement, or the Belfast Agreement as I would call it, is actually quite important, because time changes lots and lots of things, and of course what we are seeing under direct will, we'll have that space to look at it. We can't have a situation where there are two parties in mandatory coalition and one can always pull the plug and say we're walking away, and then they don't go back in until they get some new demands.
Today the government made clear it stands foursquare behind the agreement.
As the House will recognise, this April marks the 20th anniversary of the historic Belfast Agreement. That agreement, along with its successors, has been fundamental in helping Northern Ireland move forward from its violent past to a brighter, more secure future. And this government's support for the agreements remains steadfast, as does our commitment to govern for everyone in Northern Ireland.
There is fury at senior levels of the government after some Tories lent their weight to the calls for a rethink of the Good Friday Agreement. One cabinet minister told me it would be the height of absurdity to make unilateral changes to the 1998 agreement. From the Prime Minister downwards, there is a determination to re-establish all of its institutions by brokering a deal between the DUP and Sinn Fein. But one of the original signatories to the Good Friday Agreement says the government must act by introducing a short parliamentary bill to hand the powers vested in the Northern Ireland Power Sharing Executive to its Assembly.
Instead of just going on with London's intervening from time to time to try and do things, but not having proper decisions made by people who have their roots in Northern Ireland and are accountable to the Northern Ireland electorate, I think the only way we can proceed is by having a situation where the Assembly can function without an executive. And I think that is possible, and it would be a way of avoiding the present impasse.
A former Northern Ireland secretary who presided over changes to the Good Friday Agreement a decade ago acknowledges there is a precedent for amending the accord. But Lord Hain warns that today's calls for change, mainly from Brexit supporters, could have grave consequences.
There's no question that these Brextremists, in their hardline support for a particular dogmatic position of Brexit, are actually playing with fire. They're endangering the peace process, and they could incite dissident IRA groups who are very well armed and have made attacks and killed people in recent years, but they're very isolated and marginalized at the moment. It could incite greater support for them and therefore a greater threat from them.
I don't think there's any threat to any long-term threat to what we agreed 20 years ago. And I don't think there's any chance of there being a breakdown and a return to violence.
Sinn Féin agrees that dissident Republicans pose no threat to the peace process, but the party warns of the dangers of challenging the Good Friday Agreement.
These interventions represent nothing more than a wrecker's charter. And in fact, the very wrong-headed and the irresponsible nature of the interventions at this particular point in time, in fact, exaggerate the extent of the political crisis that we are living through. The Good Friday Agreement has been under relentless pushback from sections of political unionism from it was first signed.
Referendums are meant to settle political disputes for a generation. From the Good Friday Agreement to Brexit, we are learning that to some, they are not the final word.